Welcome to Creepy Vibes. Today, we're venturing deep into the heart of Texas, where the land is as vast as its legends and just as terrifying. From eerie lights haunting dark rivers to ancient forces that never should have been disturbed, get ready for 20 haunted houses in Texas that no one will buy, places so cursed, abandoned, and terrifying that even the bravest souls stay far, far away. These are the homes where the walls remember every scream, and something waits behind every creaking door. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake: they leave without subscribing. And by doing so, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's just the beginning. And the terror waiting in the darkness is far from over. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here, the night is only getting started, and the horror is waiting to unfold. Now, let's dive into the darkness. The house on the edge of Jefferson had been empty for as long as anyone could remember, but it wasn't forgotten. People talked about it in hushed voices, like it might hear them if they spoke too loud. It stood behind a sagging iron gate at the end of a cracked stone path choked with weeds, its roof caved on one side, and its windows dark except for one. Always that one upstairs window, the one where folks swore they saw her. The burnt widow, they called her. A blackened figure, unmoving, just watching. And if you got close enough, they said you could smell it. The smoke, the charred wood, the stench of burned flesh that never left. No matter how many years passed, the fire had happened in 1912. Her name was Eleanor Raines, wife of a riverboat captain who drowned when his ship went down in a storm on the Red River. She was left alone in that house, a young widow in black with no children and no family near. Some said she went mad with grief, wandering the halls with a candle at night, whispering to herself or maybe to the husband she couldn't let go of. The night of the fire, neighbors woke to the glow and the crackling of flames. They ran to help, but by the time they reached the house, it was too late. The whole upstairs was an inferno. They said they saw her at that window, then to her, face pale and desperate, her hands beating against the glass as the fire ate its way through the room. And then she vanished in the smoke. Her body was never found. The fire burned hot and fast, leaving behind nothing but black beams and ash. And yet, people swore the house never stopped smelling like that night. Years passed. The house remained. Some tried to buy it, tried to fix it up, but no one stayed long. Tools would go missing. The air inside stayed heavy, thick like a room, full of smoke even when the windows were thrown wide. And then there was the upstairs window. Lights would glint off it at night, and if you looked, if you dared, you'd see the shadow of her, the burnt widow, just standing there, waiting. They said kids would dare each other to go inside, especially on dark nights when the moon was just a sliver. Most wouldn't make it past the porch. The air would hit them, that reek of smoke so strong it turned their stomachs. Those who went farther never talked much about what they saw. One boy, Mason Brewer, he went in on a dare when he was 16. Came back out pale as a ghost, sweat pouring down his face even though it was cold that night. He didn't say a word, not then, not ever. A few months later, he left town, packed up and never came back. Folks figured he saw her, saw something he couldn't live with. There was one man, though, Cal Weaver. He didn't believe in ghosts or curses or any of that nonsense. Cal was a drifter, working odd jobs, and he thought he'd found himself a deal when he saw the house listed for next to nothing. He moved in one October, figuring he'd patch it up, sell it, and make a quick buck. The first night, people saw the upstairs window lit up. They watched from the road, nervous but curious. and they saw her saw that black figure standing just behind the glass. Cal swore later it was just the moonlight playing tricks. But the next morning, he was out there, boarding up that window, hammering planks across it like a man trying to keep something in rather than out. The thing was, the boards didn't help. Every night, the smell of smoke filled the house. Cal said it got in his clothes, in his hair. No matter how much he washed, he couldn't get it off him. He said he'd hear footsteps on the stairs when he was lying in bed. Slow, deliberate steps, like someone burned and broken was dragging themselves up from the ashes. He'd lie there frozen, listening to them come. Closer and closer until they stopped just outside his door. Then there'd be this sound of soft, wet kind of breathing, like lungs full of smoke that wouldn't clear. And sometimes, he said, the door handle would turn slow and quiet. But the door never opened. One night, he'd had enough. He grabbed his lantern and stormed upstairs, calling out, cursing the ghost, daring it to show itself. The smell was stronger than ever. His eyes watered, his throat burned like he was in the middle of a fire. And that's when he saw her, not at the window this time. She was at the end of the hall, what was left of her. Just a blackened husk of a woman, skin melted, hanging in strips, and the eyes. God, the eyes. 2 black holes leaking smoke. He dropped the lantern. The flame hit the floor, and for a moment, the whole hall lit up like the fire had come again. But when it burned out, she was gone. Cal left that night. He didn't pack a thing, just ran. People found him the next morning, sitting on the steps of the church, his hands black with soot. He wouldn't go near the house again. Nobody would dot, and so the house still stands. The boards on that window rotted and fell away long ago. And on certain nights, when the air is heavy and the moon is thin, you can look up from the road and see her, the burnt widow, standing there, waiting. And if you're unlucky enough to get close, the smell will follow you home. It'll cling to you, no matter how many times you wash. The smell of a fire that never goes out. The smell of a woman who burned but never left. In the crumbling outskirts of Austin, where the city's lights melt into the dark hum of endless highways, there sits a squat little house that no one seems to want. It's the kind of place you don't notice at first, tucked behind a screen. Of wild oaks, its paint flaking like dead skin, its windows always seeming a little too dark, a little too empty. The locals call it cursed, though they don't say that out loud anymore. They just give it a wide berth, whisper about it in bars after one too many Lone Stars, or warn their kids to stay away when their bikes rattle too close on lazy summer afternoons. On paper, it's just a small, abandoned bungalow at the edge of a neighborhood that never quite gentrified. But the stories about that house go way back, and none of them have happy endings. It wasn't much to look at, maybe 700 square feet, with a porch that sagged in the middle and a roofline that seemed to frown. But that house had a way of drawing in people who thought they could fix it, who thought it was just another cheap property waiting for a little love and elbow grease. And every single one of them left it the same way, shaken, pale, eyes hollowed out like something had been scraped from inside them. The for sale sign out front seemed permanent, like a cruel joke leaning at a crooked angle. Weather-beaten and forgotten. It was late spring the last time someone tried. A contractor named Dale Martin, big fella, the kind who looked like he did. Seen everything in his 20 years of tearing down and putting up houses across Texas. Dale didn't believe in ghost stories, didn't care about neighborhood gossip. What he saw was an opportunity, a fixer-upper he could flip for a tidy profit, maybe used to pad his retirement fund. He bought the house for a song and moved in with his crew, all full of swagger and confidence. They brought in their tools, their sledgehammers and pry bars, their nail guns and paint buckets. The first thing they planned to do was tear up those old floorboards replaced them with clean, polished oak. That's when the trouble started. The floorboards in that house were strange from the get-go. Darker than they should have been, even. Under the dust and grime. When Dale's guys pried up the first plank, the smell hit them. Sweet and cloying like something rotten wrapped in syrup. And then came the seepage-thick, sticky liquid welling up from the exposed subfloor, oozing out from between the boards they hadn't touched yet. It was dark red, the color of old blood, and it clung to everything it touched. The tools, their gloves, the solace of their boots. One of the younger guys, Cody, tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked halfway through. He dipped a finger in it, brought it to his nose, and went pale. "It smells like blood," he said, voice low, like he was afraid to speak too loud in that place. Dale didn't want to believe it. He called a friend over at the city lab, had a sample tested. The report came back in a couple of days, no blood, no biological markers at all. Just some kind of resin maybe, the tech said, shrugging like it was no big deal. But Dale's crew wasn't so easily convinced. By then, the stuff had started seeping through fresh cuts in the floor, places they hadn't even worked on yet. It came up slow at first, in beads that caught the light like dark jewels, then faster, in rivulets that spread in thin sheets across the boards. The longer they stayed, the more it seemed to spread. And always that smell sickly sweet, clinging to their clothes and hair, filling their mouths when they tried to eat. They kept at it for a few days, thinking they could work through it. But strange things started happening. Tools went missing, only to turn up hours later, buried in the yard or stuck deep in walls they hadn't touched. At night, when the crew camped out in the house because they were too stubborn, or maybe too scared to leave it alone, they heard things. Soft creaks, like footsteps on the boards they'd left intact. Faint knocking from under the floor. Once, Dale swore he heard a woman's voice, low and sad, calling out from somewhere in the house. But when he followed it, the sound seemed to move just ahead of him. Always just out of reach. By the end of that first week, they'd had enough. Cody was the first to leave, quitting on the spot after waking to find red handprints smeared on the inside of the windows, too high for anyone to have reached without a ladder. The others followed soon after, each with their own reason, but all of them terrified in that quiet, hollow way people get when they've seen something they don't understand. Dale held out the longest, convinced he could beat it, could make the house give up its secrets. He tried sealing the floors, pouring layers of epoxy and varnish, but nothing held. The liquid kept rising, eating through everything he laid down. It ruined his tools, stained his hands. He stopped answering calls, stopped leaving the house altogether. It was an inspector who found him, finally, after a neighbor called about the smell. Dale was sitting on the floor in the middle of the living room, knees pulled up to his chest, rocking gently, eyes blank. The floor around him was slick with that red ooze, and his hands were raw from trying to scrub it away. He didn't say a word, not then, not after. Last anyone heard, he was in a facility out in Bastrop, silent as stone, staring at his hands like he could still see the stains. The house went back on the market, of course. Cheap, like always. But no one's tried to work on it since. Realtors stopped showing it. It just sits there now, watching the world go by, the for sale sign rotting into the weeds. Sometimes, if you walk past on a still night, you'll catch a whiff of that sweet, sick smell, and if you listen real hard, you might hear the soft creak of footsteps on old boards, or the faint sound of a woman crying lost and lonely, deep, in the bones of that house. And if you're smart, you'll keep walking, because some places don't want to be fixed. Some places remember. There's a stretch of land just outside Waco that most folks don't like to talk about, not because they're superstitious exactly, but because something about that place sets your teeth on edge. It's a patch of overgrown farmland, The kind where the weeds climb over each other in a choking mess, and the earth smells damp no matter how long the Texas sun bakes it. At the heart of it sits a rotting farmhouse, its roof caved in on one side, windows like empty eyes, and the front porch sagging so bad it looks like it's trying to pull itself into the ground. People call it the Crying Girl's farmhouse, and even the bravest kids don't dare each other to go near it after dark. The locals say that 70 years ago, a little girl from the family that owned the land drowned in the creek that snakes behind the property. They say her name was Annie, and they say her father found her body tangled in the roots, her hair caught like fishing line, her small face pale as milk. He carried her back to the house, wrapped in a burlap sack because that's all he had, and something inside him broke that day. The family packed up within the month, left the farmhouse to the snakes and the wind, but it's what's been heard since then that keeps folks from wandering too close. The sound of sobbing, soft and pitiful, drifting from the house on still nights. It isn't loud, not the kind of wailing you'd expect from a ghost story. Just a quiet, steady crying, like a child trying not to be heard but failing at it. The kind of sound that gets under your skin, makes the hair on your arms prickle, and sticks with you long after you've gone home and locked the door. I didn't believe any of it, not really. I thought it was one of those stories that grew legs over the years, fed by bored teenagers and old-timers with too much whiskey in their bellies. That is, until last October, when I made the mistake of going out there myself. I was doing a piece on abandoned places around Waco, snapping photos for a local magazine. The farmhouse was too perfect to pass up. I drove out in the late afternoon, thinking I'd catch the place in that golden hour light that makes even the ugliest buildings look like art. The road turned to gravel about a mile before I reached the property, and by the time I parked, the sun was sinking fast, turning the sky the color of a bruised peach. The air smelled of dust and something else, wet wood maybe, or mold. The kind of smell that makes you think of rot. I stepped onto the porch and felt it give a little under my weight. My boots crunched over broken glass and old leaves. I took a few shots of the outside, the peeling paint, the boarded-up windows, the door hanging crooked on its hinges. Then, because I was feeling brave or maybe just stupid, I went inside. The place was colder than I expected. Not just cool from the shade, but genuinely cold, like walking into a root cellar. The floors were littered with debris plaster fallen. From the ceiling, a dead bird or two, bones that might have been from raccoons or possums. The walls were streaked with grime, and graffiti covered what was left of the wallpaper. The smell was stronger inside, and I had to breathe through my mouth to keep from gagging. I started snapping pictures, telling myself I'd be in and out in 10 minutes. But then I heard it dot. At first, I thought it was the wind. It was soft, so soft I wasn't sure I'd heard anything at all. But it came again, high sound, like a child whimpering in the dark. My throat went dry. I stood there, camera hanging from its strap, heart thudding so loud in my chest I thought I might be imagining the noise. But it kept on quiet, broken sobs, coming from somewhere deeper in the house. Every instinct told me to turn around, to leave, to run back to my truck and not look back. But curiosity is a hell of a thing. I stepped further inside, past a fallen beam, through what used to be a kitchen. The crying grew clearer as I went. It sounded like it was coming from upstairs, which didn't make any sense. There hadn't been anyone living there for decades, and the stairs looked like they wouldn't hold the weight of a cat, let alone a person. Still, the sobbing called to me like a hook in my gut, and before I knew it, I was putting one foot on the bottom step, testing it. The wood groaned but held. I climbed slowly, each step creaking loud in the silence between the sobs. The crying didn't stop. It didn't get louder or softer, just stayed steady, as if whoever it was hadn't noticed me at all. When I reached the top, The floorboards were warped and buckling, but I could see where the sound was coming from. A small room at the end of the hall, the door half closed. The light was almost gone by then, the house filled with shadows. I moved toward the room, heart in my throat, telling myself I'd look inside, see it was just the wind or an animal, and get the hell out. But when I pushed the door open, the sobbing stopped. The room was empty. Nothing but a broken crib in one corner, a ragged curtain hanging limp over a shattered window. The air felt heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. And then I heard it again right behind me this time. A long, shuddering breath, as if someone was standing just over my shoulder, trying to stifle their weeping. I turned so fast I nearly lost my footing, but the hall was empty. No footprints in the dust, no sign of anyone. The sobbing started again, this time from downstairs. It was louder now, desperate. I didn't wait. I ran, nearly tripping over the broken boards, tearing my jacket on a nail as I flew down the stairs. The sobbing followed me, echoing through the house, filling it up until it felt like the walls themselves were crying. I burst out the front door and didn't stop until I was in my truck, hands shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I drove away, I swear I heard it one last time, floating out across the fields, the sound of a little girl crying, lost and alone. I never went back, and I never finished that photo series. Sometimes at night, when the wind is right, I think I hear that sound again, carried on the breeze. And I wonder if that poor girl is still searching for someone to find her, all these years later. Or maybe, just maybe, she's waiting for someone else to join her in that lonely, broken house. The Hanged Man's Cottage sat at the edge of San Antonio, far from the sprawl of the city's neon and noise, tucked into a patch of land that locals avoided without quite knowing why. You wouldn't see it from the road unless you were looking. Hidden as it was behind a curtain of ancient oaks that leaned low and gnarled as if in pain. The biggest oak of all stood dead center in the yard, its bark blackened and scarred, with a great thick limb that jutted out like the crooked arm of a corpse. It was under that limb, long before any cottage was built, that they say the outlaws swung. Back when justice was a noose in a tree, and men's lives ended in the hush of the Texas night with the snap of a rope and the last rattle of breath. They hanged them there, horse thieves, murderers, maybe a few innocent souls too unlucky to prove otherwise. And when the hanging was done, the bodies would stay till dawn, twisting gently in the breeze, eyes wide, tongues black and swollen. Feet bare and dangling over the grass dot, the cottage came later. Some fool in the 1920s thought it a fine spot to build a place for his bride, or so the story goes. Didn't last long. She died in that house. People disagree on how. Some say she fell from the loft. Others whisper about poison in her tea. The husband vanished not long after, and the cottage sat empty for decades, filling with dust and decay, until the land was sold off cheap to anyone desperate or dumb enough to take it. And so it went for years. People moved in, folks down on their luck or just passing through. They always left in a hurry. Always after the same thing, waking in the small hours to a sound like someone choking, or the soft creak of rope straining under weight. Renters. Told of dreams that weren't dreams at all, of standing beneath that oak, feeling the noose slip around their throat, of watching the world from behind dead, swollen eyes. They said they could taste the dirt on their tongue when they woke. Some swore they saw a figure out there at night, hanging from that limb, swaying in the breeze that never blew. Jared was different, or so he thought. He was a drifter, no family, no ties, a man who'd seen too much and felt too little. He took the cottage because it was cheap and because he didn't believe in stories. A house was a house. Wood and nails couldn't hurt you. Ghosts were for the weak-minded. He moved in on a blistering June afternoon, the air thick with heat and the stink of wild grass baking under the sun. The oak loomed over him as he carried his things inside, its shadow falling across the yard like a warning. He didn't look up at it, wouldn't give it the satisfaction. That first night, he sat on the porch with a bottle, watching the light die in the west, listening to the night creatures stir in the grass. The house behind him settled and creaked, the way old houses do, and somewhere a coyote yipped at the rising moon. When he finally went to bed, the cottage seemed to breathe around him, every board and beam sighing in the dark. He lay awake a long time, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the hum of the night. And then, just as sleep began to pull him under, he heard it. The sound was faint at first, a soft creaking, like a porch swing caught in a lazy breeze. But the air was still. Jared held his breath, listening. The creak came again, slower now, heavier, as if carrying weight. He told himself it was the house settling on its old bones. But then came the other sound, low and wet, a choking gasp that rose from the yard like a voice from the grave. He sat up, heart thudding, and peered out the window. The oak stood in the moonlight, stark and black against the silver sky. And there, from the thick limb, something swung. It swayed gently, back and forth, as if moved by hands unseen. Jared rubbed his eyes, cursed at himself for drinking too much, and forced himself to look again. This time, the limb was empty. He didn't sleep that night. He told himself he didn't care. But when morning came, he found himself out in the yard, staring up at the oak. The branch where he thought he'd seen the figure was scarred, as if something heavy had worn at it over time. The ground beneath was bare, of grass, packed hard and dark. He spat, muttered that it was just a tree, and went about his day, but the nights didn't stop. The creaking came again, and the choking sounds grew louder, more desperate, as if someone struggled against the noose, fighting for breath that would not come. Jared tried to ignore it, tried to drown it out with liquor and music, but nothing worked. Every night the sounds drew closer until he could swear they came from just outside his window. And always that oak, looming there like a gallows waiting its turn. He started seeing things in daylight too, a shadow at the edge of his vision, the shape of a man hanging there when he turned too fast. Once, he found footprints beneath the tree, deep prints as if someone had stood there in heavy boots, pacing beneath the limb. And the smell, God, the smell. A stink of rot and old rope, of damp earth and death that clung to him when he woke. On the fourth night, he woke to the sound of the front door creaking open, slow and soft, as if someone had slipped inside. He froze, ears straining, heart hammering. In his chest, a floorboard groaned, then another. The steps came closer, steady and deliberate, across the warped floor toward his room. Jared grabbed the tire iron he kept beside the bed and rose to meet whatever had come for him. But when he threw open the door, the hallway was empty. The house was empty. Only the night waited outside, thick and silent. And the oak, always the oak with its black limbs stretched out like a noose. That was the last night Jared spent in the hanged man's cottage. He left before dawn, without packing, without locking the door. He didn't care. He just wanted to be gone, to put miles between him and that cursed place. The cottage sits empty again now, waiting for the next soul who thinks they're braver than the dead. And at night, if you stand quiet and still, you can hear it, the creak of rope, the rattle of breath, and the soft sigh of the oak as it claims another. The Devil's Duplex sat at the edge of a forgotten Dallas neighborhood, where the streets cracked like old bones and weeds pushed up through the concrete like the earth trying to take back what was stolen. The duplex wasn't hard to find if you had the bad luck to be looking for it. A sagging chain-link fence barely kept out the curious, and the shell of the house, with its hollow windows and caved-in roof, seemed to watch anyone who passed by, like it was waiting for something. Or someone. Folks around those parts didn't like to talk about it much. The older ones remembered when construction started back in 1953, remembered the man who owned it, Frank Donahue, a sharp-dressed fellow with cold eyes and too much money for his own good. Frank had big plans, they said, wanted to rent out the duplex to the city's wealthier types looking to escape the hustle of downtown, but then one day he was gone, just like that. Vanished. Tools left scattered in the yard, paint cans rusting where they stood, scaffolding leaning drunkenly against the unfinished walls. No one ever saw him again. The police searched for a while, but it was like Frank had been swallowed up by the land itself. After that, no one wanted to touch the property. Contractors who came to look at finishing the place either backed out or never came back at all. They said they felt sick on the grounds, said their tools went missing or that something whispered to them from inside the walls. And then the stories started. The ones about the horned figure dot at first, it was just kids talking downstairs, sneaking out at dusk to see who could spot it. They said that as the sun dropped behind the skyline, a shadow with curling horns would appear on the roof, standing perfectly still, watching the neighborhood. But after a while, it wasn't just kids seeing it. Grown men, coming home late from work, swore they saw the figure too, its outline blacker than the night, horns twisting like dead branches. A mailman quit his route after claiming he saw it jump from the roof and disappear into the trees without making a sound. Dogs wouldn't go near the place. Even birds avoided perching on the house. All that would have been nothing but local legend if not for what happened to the boy. His name was Jamie Cruz, 13 years old, the kind of kid who couldn't leave a mystery alone. Jamie lived 2 streets over in a squat little house with peeling paint and a yard littered with broken bikes. His mama worked nights and his daddy wasn't around much at all. That duplex called to Jamie like a siren. He'd stare at it from his bedroom window, watching the roofline, waiting for the figure to show. One evening, just as the sky turned the color of old bruises, Jamie told his friend Eric that he was going to climb up there. Eric begged him not to. Jamie just laughed and said he wanted to see if the devil was real. They snuck out after dark, flashlights weak and flickering in the heavy air. The street was quiet, too quiet, like the whole world was holding its breath. When they reached the fence, Jamie slipped through a hole in it while Eric stayed back, too scared to follow. Eric said Jamie moved like he was in a trance, heading straight for the house, not even looking back once. He watched his friend scramble up the rotted porch, then disappear inside. The minutes dragged on, each one colder and heavier than the last. Eric swore he heard something inside the duplex, a sound like nails scraping wood, or maybe hooves on the floorboards. Then came the scream, sharp, full of terror, and cut off too fast. Eric ran all the way home, heart pounding so loud he thought it would burst. When the police searched the duplex the next morning, they found nothing. No Jamie, no blood, no sign he'd ever been there. Just the empty shell of the house, and that awful silence pressing down on the place. Jamie's mother never stopped looking. She'd stand outside the duplex some nights, calling his name until neighbors came to pull her away. And the figure, well, it kept showing up. If anything, it seemed to appear more often after Jamie vanished. People started to see it not just at dusk, but at dawn too, its horns catching the first light of morning like 2 jagged scars against the sky. And sometimes, if the wind was just right, they said you could hear footsteps on the roof, pacing back and forth like whatever it was couldn't rest. A few years later, a man named Carson tried to buy the place. Said he didn't believe in ghost stories and wanted to tear the duplex down, build something new. The city approved it, and for a while folks thought maybe the curse would be broken. Carson brought in heavy machinery, crews with hard hats and steel boots. But on the first day of demolition, the bulldozer stalled out right as it reached the front porch. No reason for it, the thing was brand new, just serviced. Then one of the workers fell from the scaffolding, broke both legs. The others quit on the spot. Carson gave up too. Left the duplex to rot where it stood. Now, no one goes near it. The weeds have swallowed up the fence, and the roof has caved in even more. But still, when the sun sinks low over Dallas, you can see the shape of something standing up there, horns twisting toward the heavens, body tall and still as death. Some say it's Frank Donahue, cursed for whatever deal he made before he disappeared. Others think it's Jamie, lost forever, turned into the very thing he wanted to find. But most folks just lock their doors a little earlier, pull the curtains tight, and pray the devil's duplex keeps its shadows to itself. Because if you look too long at that roofline, if you stare into the dark and see that figure staring back sometimes, it notices you too. There's a stretch of Sealy Avenue in Galveston where the old houses lean a little from salt and storm, their paint peeling in long, scabby strips, and their porches sagging like the faces of tired old men. But none of them were their age, like the house at 1207 Sealy. Locals don't even call it by number anymore. They just call it the house that whispers. Tourists, drunk off beach bars and ghost tour pamphlets, sometimes dare each other to go up and touch its gate, but they never stay long. Something about that place gets under your skin, especially when the wind picks up and the Gulf howls through the live oaks. On nights like that, they say the house starts talking low and breathy, a strange gibberish that no one alive can place. I always thought it was just a story until the winter my cousin Sam came to stay with me and wouldn't stop poking around. The place, like a dog sniffing at a buried bone. Sam had a way of getting obsessed. When we were kids, it was UFOs, then Bigfoot, then true crime. Now, at 34 and fresh off a divorce that gutted him, it was haunted houses. And Galveston, God help him, was crawling with them. He rolled into town that December in a rust-bitten pickup, all wide eyes and big plans, and by the second night he had that house on Sealy in his sights. Said it was the real deal. Said it was calling to him. I laughed it off at first, but I felt the pull when I stood in front of it with him that night. The place looked like a corpse of wood and glass, half sunk into the earth. The front gable hung low, like it was trying to listen to the ground, and the upper windows glared out like dead eyes. The fence was iron, twisted, and black with age. And beyond it, the yard was a jungle of weeds and salt-bitten shrubs. And then there was the sound, the reason folks crossed the street rather than walk past it on stormy nights. A kind of murmuring, too low to catch words, but rhythmic like speech. It didn't rise and fall with the wind. It came from the house itself, deep in the walls or under the floors, steady and strange. Sam wanted in. I told him no, that the cops would haul us in if we so much as touched that gate. But he had that look, the one that meant he was going to do something dumb whether I liked it or not. 2 nights later, during a nasty coastal storm that sent the surf crashing against the seawall, Sam slipped out with a crowbar and his phone light and left me pacing the floor of my apartment, sick with worry. I tried to call him, no answer. I tried again. Voicemail. The storm screamed against the windows, and in the distance I thought I could hear the house whispering its nonsense language through the gale. Hours passed. Just as dawn broke gray and wet over the city, Sam stumbled through my door, soaked to the bone, mud up to his knees, eyes wild. He didn't say a word, just collapsed on the floor, shaking like a man who's been too close to something he shouldn't have seen. It took the better part of a day to get the story out of him. He'd pried his way into the house through a side window warped with age. Inside, the air was heavy, thick with rot and salt, and the floorboards groaned under his weight. The walls, he said, were alive with that whispering louder now, clearer, like 1,000 dry mouths mumbling in concert. He moved through the rooms, his light catching on stained wallpaper and cracked plaster, but there was nothing human there. No vagrants, no animals, just that voice or voices seeping from the walls themselves. And as he climbed the stairs, the sound changed, became urgent, angry, like it knew he was there and didn't want him. In the master bedroom, he found the source, a patch of wall where the plaster had crumbled to reveal the old lathe underneath, and from the cracks between the slats, the whispering poured like breath. Sam said he leaned in, trying to understand, and the language shifted again, became something almost familiar, like English spoken backward or underwater. And then he saw the eyes. 2 of them, wide and black, staring at him from deep inside. The wall, he swore they blinked. That's when he ran, tearing his jeans on broken wood, tumbling down the stairs, the house screaming after him in that awful, garbled voice. He wanted to leave town that day. Couldn't bring himself to pack fast enough. But as night fell, the storm returned, worse than before. Rain lashed the city. The wind howled down the alleys. And in the roar of it, all I heard it, that voice, clearer now than I'd ever heard. It, whispering through the walls of my own apartment. Sam heard it too. His face went pale as ash, and he started babbling that it had followed him, that it wouldn't let him go. The walls shivered with sound like the building itself was breathing. We tried to leave, but the storm pinned us down. All night, the voice filled the rooms, rising and falling, sometimes pleading, sometimes furious. And mixed in with the gibberish, I could swear I heard my name, and Sam's, over and over, like it knew us now, like it had marked us. When the storm broke at dawn, we fled. Sam left Galveston that morning, and I haven't seen him since. He won't return my calls. As for me, I moved clear across town, as far inland as I could afford. But even now, when the wind is high and the Gulf is angry, I swear I can still hear it faint and far off the house that whispers, calling to me in a tongue not meant for the living. And some nights when sleep won't come, I dream of that patch of crumbling wall and the eyes behind it, watching, waiting, hungry for the next fool to listen too close. They called it La Hacienda de las Sombras. The old house sat on the edge of El Paso, where the city gave way to the cracked, dry skin of the desert, where the heat clung to your bones and the nights were too quiet. It had once belonged to a Spanish land baron, or so the legend went, a cruel man who built his fortune on the backs of the weak and left their blood in the dust. The land was sacred long before he arrived, a place the native people called cursed because of what slept beneath it and what would one day rise. But time has a way of swallowing stories, and by the time the fated hacienda went up for sale in the modern age, folks only whispered about its bad luck. The kind of luck you don't believe in until it finds you. The first to buy it in recent memory was a man named Carter Hayes, a banker from Dallas who'd made his millions on risky deals and thought himself too smart for old ghost tales. He bought the place as a retreat, a getaway from the noise of the city. He came with his wife June and their teenage daughter Megan, expecting peace, and found something else entirely. It started with the walls always cold, even in the dead of summer when the air outside was like an oven. Then the strange noises. At night, the sounds of footsteps where no one walked, the soft crying of a woman that echoed through the halls when the moon was high. Carter laughed it off. June didn't. Megan began to draw pictures of shadows with hollow eyes and mouths stretched too wide. Within 6 months, June was gone, left in the middle of the night, leaving only a note that said, "I can't stay. Here, I'm sorry." No one heard from her again. Carter's fortune crumbled soon after, bad investments, lawsuits, bankruptcy. He died in the house alone, the victim of what the paper called a self-inflicted wound. But the locals knew better. The house had taken from him, like it always did. Then there was the Gomez family. Tomas Gomez was a contractor, proud of his Mexican roots, and he saw the old hacienda as a piece of history worth saving. He moved in with his wife Rosa and their 2 boys, thinking he'd restore the place, breathe new life into it. The first few months were good. Tomas patched the roof, fixed the crumbling walls, planted roses in the courtyard where weeds had grown wild. But then the whispers started, soft voices that spoke in a language he didn't understand, voices that came from the ground beneath the house. His boys grew sick, thin and pale, their eyes dark with sleepless nights. Rosa begged to leave, but Tomas wouldn't. His pride wouldn't let him. One night, a fire broke out. No one knew how it started. The house burned, but not to the ground. The bones of it remained, blackened and hollow, like a carcass left in the sun. The Gomez family vanished after that. No forwarding address, no trace. Just gone. Years passed, and the hacienda sat empty, the air around it heavy with heat and silence. People avoided it, crossed the street rather than walk near the gate. Kids dared each other to touch the door, but no one stayed long, until the Turners came. Emily and Sam Turner, city folk looking for a fresh start after losing their son, too. A drunk driver. The grief had hollowed them out, left them shells of who they'd been, and the cheap price of the old place felt like a sign. Emily loved the high ceilings, the old wood beams, the smell of history in the walls. Sam liked the isolation, the distance from the world that had taken so much from them. They moved in on a bright spring day. By summer, the house had begun. Its work dot, it started with the dreams. Emily would wake sobbing, saying she'd seen their son standing in the courtyard, calling to her. Sam heard music at night, soft guitar strings, and voices singing in the dark. The rooms shifted when they weren't looking, doors that wouldn't stay closed, windows that refused to open no matter how hard they tried. The air grew thick, heavy with the smell of earth, like freshly dug graves. Emily became convinced their son was buried beneath the house, that if they just dug deep enough, they'd find him. Sam tried to stop her, but she'd already started. By then, tearing up the courtyard, clawing at the dry soil with her hands. He found her out there one night, bleeding and covered in dirt, her nails broken, her eyes wild. "He's down there, Sam. I heard him." The ground gave way a week later. During a storm that came out of nowhere, the earth cracked open beneath the hacienda, swallowing part of the house, leaving a jagged hole that stank of rot and old death. The Turners were never seen again. Some said they fell in, others that they ran, driven mad by whatever they found. In the dark, the house still stands, broken and silent, its windows like black eyes watching the desert. The locals say you can hear the crying if you stand near the gate at night, the soft weeping of the lost. The land is sacred, they whisper, sacred and disturbed, and it will never rest. Every so often, someone new comes along, someone who doesn't. Believe in curses, someone who thinks they can tame what sleeps beneath the hacienda. And every time, the house takes its price, be it fortune, family, or sanity. It always takes. They say, if you're driving through Beaumont after dark and you catch a glimpse of that house at the end of Culver Lane, you should look the other way and keep on driving. Folks around there call it the Black House, but that's not its real name, of course. No one remembers the real name anymore. The house was painted black after the fire, and it just stuck. It sits back from the road, crooked and half hidden behind a mess of old pecan trees, with paint peeling like dead skin and a roofline that sags as if the place itself is tired of standing. It was supposed to be torn down years ago, but somehow, it never happened. Nobody wants to own the land and no one will touch the place. Even the city avoids it. Too much bad history, they say. Too many things best left alone. I first saw it when I was 16. Me and my friend Casey were out late, driving around aimlessly like kids do, smoking cigarettes and trying to act tougher than we were. It was one of those muggy Texas nights when the air feels thick enough to choke on and the mosquitoes hum around you like they're whispering warnings. We ended up on Culver Lane without meaning to, the way you sometimes do when you're not paying attention. The road was narrow and cracked, and the blacktop looked almost wet in the moonlight. That's when I saw the house at the end of the lane, just sitting there in the shadows, watching us. There was something about it that made my skin crawl. The windows, all 4 of them in the front, were black as tar, but I swear to God they started to glow faint red as we got closer. Not like light inside, but like embers, like something smoldering just beneath the surface. I told Casey to turn around, but he laughed it off and kept driving, saying it was just the reflection of the taillights or maybe our imaginations playing tricks on us. But the closer we got, the more that red glow seemed to pulse, like the house was alive and breathing. Slow, angry breaths. When we were maybe 50 feet away, the car sputtered. Just died like that. Casey cursed and tried the ignition again and again, but the engine wouldn't even click. The night felt heavier suddenly, like the air thickened around us. I remember the sound of the cicadas stopping all at once, leaving. Only the creak of the house's porch swing, moving in the breeze that I couldn't feel. We sat there for what felt like forever, too scared to get out, too frozen to even think straight. And then the porch light came on. But here's the thing, the porch light had burned out decades ago. Everyone knew that. And even if it hadn't, the house had no power. The city had cut the lines years earlier. Still, there it was, a faint yellow glow spilling out onto the warped boards of the porch. And in that light, we saw the shape of someone standing in the doorway. Just a shape at first. Tall, thin, unmoving. And then it stepped forward, slow and deliberate. We couldn't see its face, only that it moved like it had all the time in the world, like it had been waiting for us. Casey finally got the car to start. How? I'll never know. We tore out of there so fast we nearly hit a ditch, and neither of us said a word until we were back on the main road where the lights of town felt like salvation. We never talked about it again, not really. But I had nightmares about that night. For years. About the figure on the porch and the glow of those windows. And I wasn't the only one who'd seen it. Over the years, I heard stories from other folks' kids who dared each other to go up to the porch. Drifters who spent the night inside and came out changed, if they came out at all. There was old Roy Mercer, who lived 2 streets over. They found him wandering Culver Lane barefoot one morning, babbling about voices calling him from the house. He wouldn't go near his own home after that, wouldn't sleep inside. Died a year later, cold and alone under the highway overpass. The thing about the black house is, it didn't start with us. The fire that scarred it happened in 1890, when it was still the pride of a rich man named Elias Croft. He built it for his wife and children, biggest house in Beaumont at the time, with wraparound porches and stained glass windows imported from New Orleans, but there were rumors even then. Elias was into things he shouldn't have been, they said. Seances, dark rituals, things brought over from the old country by his grandmother. Folks whispered that he'd made a bargain for wealth and power, and that the house itself was part of the price. The fire started one October night, sudden and fierce. People said they heard screams before they saw the flames, that the family was trapped inside, though no one knows why they didn't try to get out. Some said Elias lit the fire himself as part of some unholy pact. Others swore they saw him standing on the lawn, watching the place burn, his face lit up by the flames, smiling. They found his body the next morning, or what was left of it. His. Wife and children were never found at all. After that, the house was left to rot. Someone painted it black a few years later, maybe to hide the smoke stains, maybe to keep the place from drawing attention, but the house didn't want to be forgotten. People kept seeing the glow in the windows, hearing footsteps on the porch when no one was there, catching glimpses of faces in the glass. One boy disappeared in the 50s after bragging he'd sleep inside. His body was found weeks later, miles away, half buried in a swamp, his skin gray and bloated, his eyes wide open like he'd seen something so terrible it froze him that way forever. I moved away from Beaumont as soon as I could, but I think about that house more than I'd like to admit. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I see that porch light flickering on in the dark, see that figure standing there, waiting. And I wonder if it remembers me, if it's still waiting for me to come back. And I know better than to ever go near it again. But sometimes, late at night, I dream I'm back on Culver Lane, the road cracked and narrow, the house at the end of it pulsing red through those black windows like the heart of something that refuses to die. And in the dream, no matter how hard I try, I can't look away. The house on the edge of Lubbock's crumbling outskirts had been empty for so long that even the locals spoke of it in hushed voices, as if the damn thing might hear them. It sat at the end of a dirt track that hadn't seen fresh tire marks in years, and though the address still showed up on city records, no mail carrier dared go near it. The homestead was a 2-story clapboard monstrosity, weathered down to the bone, its paint long peeled away, its roof sagging like a tired man's shoulders. But it was the windows that folks remembered most, boarded up tight with warped splintering planks. They seemed somehow to stare back at you, hollow and accusing, as if the house itself resented your gaze. People said the boards weren't nailed on by human hands. They said they grew there. They said worse things too, after dark, when whiskey loosened tongues. Over the years, plenty had tried to make a buck off the place. The land wasn't worthless. Not by Texas standards anyway, and for those who thought themselves braver or dumber than most, it looked like easy pickings. Just rip down the boards, gut the inside, slap some fresh paint on, and you'd have yourself a charming little fixer-upper to pawn off on some city couple wanting a slice of country life. But the house didn't take kindly to that. No one got far. First was Dale Compton, a house flipper from Amarillo who came in with his work crew, all swagger and spit. They rolled up in their trucks, tools gleaming, radios blasting. By sundown, the music had stopped. The trucks were still parked out front, doors hanging open like gaping mouths, and not a single man could be found. Folks went out looking, of course. Sheriff's boys, volunteers, even a preacher or two thinking maybe the Lord had work for them out there. But all they found were the tools. Hammers, saws, pry bars, just lying there in the dirt as if the men had simply vanished mid-swing. No sign of struggle, no blood, no footprints leading away. The boards on the windows, still there. Maybe even thicker than before. After that, the house sat quiet for a while. But greed's a stubborn thing, especially in a place where money's hard to come by. Next was a fella named Sam Duggan, some out-of-town investor with no ties to Lubbock, no family to warn him off. He came alone, smart enough or dumb enough not to bring help. Said he wanted to survey the property before bringing in a crew. Folks at the gas station tried to talk him down, told him the stories, but he just laughed, filling up his rental with a tank of unleaded and a bag of barbecue chips. That was the last anyone saw of him. A rancher riding fence 2 days later spotted the rental parked in the overgrown yard, driver's door open, key still in the ignition. Inside the house, there was nothing. No Sam, no suitcase, just a strange smell like burnt hair and old earth. The boards on the windows? They looked fresher somehow. like they'd been fed. By then, the hollow-eyed homestead, as folks started calling it, was more legend than real estate. Kids dared each other to ride their bikes out there, but never made it past the rusted gate. Hunters gave the place wide berth, even when deer were scarce. And at night, if you parked along the road and killed your engine, you swore you could hear things. Not voices exactly, but something moving around in there. Slow, heavy, like the house was breathing. Then last summer, a new couple rolled into town, big ideas and bigger smiles. Jamie and Carla, fresh from Austin, looking to escape city life and make their mark. They bought the property dirt cheap, too cheap, and told everyone they'd be different. They weren't like the others, they said. They had a plan. They'd respect the character of the place, turn it into a charming bed and breakfast, maybe host weddings on the grounds. They moved in an RV while they worked, parked it right beside the porch where the steps had long since rotted away. Jamie was handy. Folks admitted that. You could hear him banging and sawing from dawn till dusk. And Carla had a green thumb started, trying to clear the yard, plant some roses where the weeds were thickest. People watched from a distance, waiting to see what would happen. It took about a week. The first sign was when the lights stopped coming on at night. No glow from the RV, no soft music playing like before. The next morning, someone finally got up the nerve to drive out there. The RV door stood open, flapping in the breeze. The tools were scattered around the yard as if dropped mid-task. A ladder leaned against the house, but the top rung was snapped clean in two, dangling like a broken limb. And the boards? The boards were different. Thicker, heavier, not just over the windows now, but spreading across the porch like veins or roots growing outward. And the thing was, they weren't nailed down. They didn't look like any wood you'd find in these parts. Darker, slicker, almost wet to the touch. Some said that no one saw Jamie or Carla again. Their folks filed missing persons reports, of course. Cops went out, poked around, but didn't stay long. They didn't like the way the place felt, the way the air seemed thicker around it, like you were breathing through a wet rag. The house didn't want them there. Everyone could feel it. Now, the hollow-eyed homestead just waits. The grass is waist-high, the boards are like scars across its face, and the dirt track is all but gone. But sometimes, if you're driving real slow past that stretch of road late at night, with the moon just right, you'll swear you see a figure standing at one of those boarded-up windows, peeking out between the cracks, watching, and if you're really unlucky, you might catch the glint of hollow eyes staring back. And you'll drive faster, heart thudding in your chest, and you'll tell yourself it was nothing, just shadows, just your imagination. But deep down, you'll know the truth. The house is still hungry, and it's waiting for someone just like you. There's something about Denton that keeps a piece of the past clawing at the present, like a hand reaching out of the grave. Folks who've lived there long enough will lower their voices when they speak of certain places, as if the very walls of the town could listen. And of all those places, none carries the weight of dread quite like the shack on Old Crowley Road. It sits back from the cracked asphalt, half hidden behind a tangle of mesquite and hackberry trees, slumping like it's trying to sink into the earth and disappear. But no matter how time or weather try to erase it, every Halloween, like clockwork, that shack reminds everyone it's still there. The first scream comes just after sunset, when the sky turns that strange purple, like a bruise spreading across the horizon. It starts low, almost like the wind working its way through the trees, but then it rises, high and sharp, splitting the air so clean it makes the dogs howl and the cattle spook in their pens. Folks say it echoes for miles, bouncing off the old grain silos and empty barns, so that even people in town stop what they're doing and listen with their hearts pounding. You can tell yourself it's the wind or some prank, but deep down, you know better. I heard it for the first time when I was 16. My buddies and I thought we were fearless back then, fueled by cheap beer and bravado. We dared each other to go up to that shack to see what made the noise. The grown-ups had always warned us off, told us stories about folks who'd gone poking around and hadn't come back right. Old Roy Henderson, who ran the gas station out on 380, claimed his brother disappeared out there one October night back in '72, and all they ever found was his truck, doors hanging open, keys still in the ignition. But being young and stupid, we laughed it off. So there we were, 3 of us, pushing through the underbrush, flashlights cutting thin beams through the dark. The shack looked worse up close. The wood was gray and splintered, the roof half caved in. The front door hung by one rusted hinge, and every time the breeze stirred, it creaked in and out like it was breathing. The closer we got, the colder it felt, and not just from the night air. It was the kind of cold that sinks into your bones, makes your teeth ache. Then came the scream. God help me, I'll never forget it. We were maybe 20 feet from the porch when it hit louder than anything I'd ever heard, so loud it felt like it rattled my insides. It wasn't just a sound. It was pain, terror, loss all rolled into one long, piercing shriek that seemed to go on forever. We dropped our lights, covered our ears, stumbled back. I swear the air shimmered around that shack like heat off pavement, even though it was cold as a grave. We ran, of course. Ran like hell, crashing through the brush, not caring about the cuts or the branches whipping our faces. When we finally made it back to the road, panting and wild-eyed, none of us spoke. We just stood there, listening as the scream faded into the night, replaced by the usual sounds, the chirp of crickets, the far-off bark of a dog. But nothing felt usual anymore. Years went by and I stayed away from that place. Most folks did. Every Halloween, the scream would come, and people would lock their doors, keep the kids inside. Some nights, you'd see cars parked along the shoulder of Old Crowley Road, people sitting inside with their windows rolled up, daring each other to listen. A few brave or foolish souls tried to approach it over the years. A group of college kids went out there one October night, armed with cameras and recorders, hoping to capture proof of the haunting. Only 2 came back. They wouldn't talk about what they saw. Just packed up and left town within the week. There were always stories, of course. The most common one was about a woman named Eloise Harper who'd lived in that shack with her husband back in the 1940s. Folks said he was a mean drunk, beat her something awful. One Halloween night, he came home in a rage and set the place on fire with her still inside. The shack burned hot and fast, but somehow the bones of it remained charred and broken. They say you can still see the scorched wood if you look close, black as sin even after all these years. Some believe the scream is hers, trapped between this world and the next, crying out for help that never came. But there are older stories too, ones that don't get told much anymore. Tales about the land itself, long before there was a shack. About things that lived in the dark, old and hungry, drawn to blood and fear. Some of the older families whisper about curses and deals gone wrong, about settlers who vanished without a trace. That shack, they say, is just where the badness seeps through. Last year I made the mistake of going back. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that it was all just legend, that I was too old to be scared by ghost stories. Or maybe I felt the pull of it, like so many before me. I parked by the side of the road, waited until the sky turned that deep bruise purple, and walked down the path I hadn't set foot on in decades. The trees seemed closer now, the shadows thicker. The shack looked smaller than I remembered, but no less menacing. I stood there, heart hammering, watching as the wind played with that broken door. And then the scream came, and it was like I was 16 again, frozen in place, every hair on my body standing up. But this time, I didn't run. I forced myself forward, one step at a time, up onto the sagging porch. The boards groaned under my weight, and I thought for sure they'd give way. Inside, the darkness was thick, but the moonlight slanted through holes in the roof, casting strange patterns on the floor. I could smell the rot, the damp, and underneath it all, something coppery, like old blood. The scream had stopped, but the air still vibrated with it, like the echo hadn't quite faded. Then I saw her, just for a second. A figure, at the far end of the room where the shadows were deepest. A woman, thin and twisted, her mouth open in a silent wail, eyes hollow and black. She lifted a hand toward me, and I swear I felt the cold rush of it against my face. I don't remember leaving. I only know that I found myself back at my truck, shaking so hard I could barely get the key in the ignition. I don't go near that road anymore. And every Halloween, when that first scream slices through the night, I lock my doors, turn up the TV, and try not to listen. But I hear it anyway. We all do. And every year, it sounds closer. They called it Dead Man's Crossing, though no signpost marked the name and the maps didn't bother with it. It was just a barren stretch of land about 20 miles outside Amarillo, where the prairie grass grew in sickly patches and the wind always seemed to blow colder than it should. Old-timers whispered that cattle rustlers had swung from the crooked limbs of the dying trees there, back when the land was still wild and law came at the end of a rope. Folks said the earth drank their blood and never gave it back. And right at the heart of that cursed ground stood a house, if you could still call it that. It was a 2-story structure, leaning hard to one side, the kind of place that looked like it had been forgotten by time and mercy both. The boards were gray and splintered, the windows dark as empty sockets, and the foundation seemed to sag deeper into the soil with each passing year, as if the house itself was trying to escape what lay beneath it. Nobody lived there, not really. Kids dared each other to go up on Halloween, and drifters sometimes holed up for the night when the cold came down hard. But no one stayed long. They all said the same thing afterward the house breathed. The floors heaved underfoot like a dying man's chest. The walls moaned when the wind was still. And at night, when the prairie went quiet, you could hear something moving in the earth below, slow and heavy, like the turning of a great wheel or the grinding of ancient bones. It was early November, when Billy Hargrove decided to prove them all wrong. He was 23, with more beer in his veins than sense, and a chip on his shoulder the size of Texas itself. His daddy had died out there on Dead Man's Crossing drunk and frozen in the cab of his pickup after getting himself good and lost one winter night. Folks said it was the land that got him, that the house drew him in like it did with all lost souls. Billy didn't buy it. He said it was just bad luck and bad liquor, and he meant to show everybody in Amarillo that the stories were nothing but campfire lies. He packed a bag with a flashlight, some jerky, and a bottle of wild turkey, threw it in the back of his truck, and drove out to the house just as the sun was bleeding out across the horizon. The wind was sharp, carrying that dry, dusty smell of the plains, and the sky was turning the color of old bruises. Billy killed the engine, grabbed his bag, and stood there for a minute, staring at the place. It looked worse up close. The porch sagged in the middle, the door hung crooked on its hinges, and the roofline dipped like a broken spine. But Billy just spat in the dirt and strode up the steps, boots thudding on the warped boards, and pushed inside. The air smelled of rot and old earth, thick enough to taste. Dust motes hung in the last light seeping through the cracked windows, and the floor creaked under his weight like it might give out any second. Billy flicked on his flashlight and swept the beam around. The place was empty except for a few busted chairs and a table that looked like it had been gnawed on by rats. The wallpaper was peeling in long yellowed strips, and something dark and sticky streaked the walls in places where the paint had bubbled and cracked. He laughed, loud and hard, the sound bouncing around the hollow room. "Some haunted house," he muttered, kicking aside an old tin can. He made his way up the stairs, which groaned under each step like they were trying to warn him. The second floor was worse colder, like the walls kept out not just the wind but the warmth of the world. There were 2 bedrooms up there, both empty except for broken beds and piles of moldering blankets. He picked the room at the back, where a window faced out over the prairie, and dropped his bag. He sat on the edge of the bed, pulled out the bottle, and took a long swallow, letting the burn chase away the chill crawling up his spine. Night came fast out there, a kind of dark that felt thick, like it pressed against the glass, hungry to get inside. Billy lit a candle he found in his bag and set it on the windowsill, watching the flame gutter and dance in the draft. The house settled around him, popping and creaking as the cold set in deeper. And then, just as he was starting to feel the whiskey loosen him up, he heard it, that sound low and deep, like something shifting in the earth beneath the floorboards. A slow, grinding rumble, as if the bones of the land were turning in their grave. He froze, bottle halfway to his lips, listening hard. The wind was dead still outside. No coyotes, no owls, nothing but that noise, rising and falling like the tide. His skin crawled, and he laughed again, though it sounded forced this time. "Just the house settling," he told himself, but his voice shook a little. He took another drink, then another, until the bottle was half empty and his head felt fuzzy. And warm. The sound kept on, though. Louder now, and closer. The floor beneath his boots seemed to pulse, as if something massive and alive was buried down there, trying to break free. He stood, the room tilting a little as the whiskey hit him full force, and stomped his foot hard, like he could scare it off. The boards buckled under him, and he stumbled back, catching himself on the broken bed frame. The candle flickered, casting long, twisted shadows on the walls. That's when he saw it, just a glimpse at first. A dark shape at the edge of the room, low to the ground, where the floor met the wall. It was like the boards had split open and something was oozing up from the crack. Thick and black, like oil, but it moved with purpose, pooling and spreading toward him. The smell hit him then sweet and rotten, like meat left out too long in the sun. Billy backed up, hard hammering now, all the whiskey in the world not enough to dull the edge of the fear that gripped him. The blackness kept coming, faster now, filling the gaps between the floorboards, climbing the walls, dripping from the ceiling in slow, heavy drops. He ran then, crashing through the door, down the stairs 2 at a time. The sound of the house roaring in his ears, the moaning, the grinding, the crack of wood splitting under strain. He burst out onto the porch, into the freezing night, and didn't stop running until he reached his truck. He fumbled with the keys, breath coming in ragged gasps, hands shaking so bad he dropped them twice before getting the door open. The engine roared to life, and he gunned it, tearing away from that house as fast as the old truck could carry him. In the rearview mirror, he saw the house shudder and sink like it was being swallowed by the land, the black ooze spilling out. Around it, spreading across the ground like a stain that would never wash clean. The house at Dead Man's Crossing was gone by morning. All that remained was a patch of earth darker than the rest, where nothing would ever grow again, and the stories folks told of the man who went out there to prove them wrong and barely made it back alive. It started with a pit bull, big, scarred-up thing that belonged to a guy down the block, the kind of dog that barked at everyone and everything, the kind folks crossed the street to avoid. One day, the dog got out. The guy didn't even see him. Worried at first, just stood on his porch with a beer in his hand, yelling half-heartedly for it to come back. Folks saw the dog tearing down the street, chasing after shadows. That wide yard at the end of the block drawing it in like a magnet. And that was the last time anybody saw the pit bull. No barking, no yelping, nothing. Just gone. Some figured it ran off, maybe caught a scent and took off for good. But a few neighbors, the ones who paid attention, they started talking about that yard. That house, Dot, it's one of those old corpus houses that shouldn't still be standing. Like it's been forgotten by time, sitting on the edge of the neighborhood where the streetlights don't quite reach. 2 stories, paint peeled down to splinters, windows so caked with dirt you can't see inside. The grass out front's dead as dust except for these patches of thorny weeds that seem to throb in the moonlight. No one's lived there since before. I was born, and probably before my parents were either. But there's always been something wrong about it. The way the air feels heavy when you walk past it. The way the shadows around it seem to stretch a little too long at dusk. After the pit bull, other dogs started disappearing. A mutt from down on Carson Street, a German shepherd that belonged to the widow in the blue house, even a little terrier that kids had been playing with just that afternoon. Always the same pattern. The dog wanders too close to that yard, maybe. Slips through the rusty chain-link fence, and that's it. Gone like smoke. At first, folks tried to laugh it off. It's just strays running off, they said. Dogs do that. But you could see it in their eyes they didn't believe. It any more than I did, Dot. Then came the noises. Late at night, when the wind comes in off the Gulf and rattles the loose boards of the place, people started hearing growls. Not dogs deeper, wetter, like something trying to remember how to make a dog's noise but getting it wrong. The first time I heard it, I was walking back from the gas station after a late shift. The street was quiet except for my boots on the cracked pavement. And then, from that house, that yard, I heard it. A low, dragging growl that made the hair on my neck stand up, like it was warning me, or maybe daring me to come closer. I didn't. I walked faster, head down, pretending I didn't hear it. That's what you do out here. You pretend you don't see or hear the things that don't make sense. But it kept happening. Night after night, those sounds. The growling. Sometimes a wet chewing noise, soft but horrible. Once in a while, sharp yip, like a dog in pain, but cut off too soon, like something had clamped down on its throat. People started keeping their dogs inside. Kids were told to stay away from that end of the street. Even the strays avoided it, slinking by with their tails between their legs. I told myself I wouldn't get involved. That's what I always told myself when it came to that house. But you can only ignore something for so long. One night, after a storm rolled through and left the streets slick with rain, I saw movement in the yard. A dog, maybe the last stray left in the neighborhood, skinny and desperate, was digging at the ground near the porch. I don't know what got into me. Maybe I felt sorry for it. Maybe I was just tired of being scared. I crossed the street, heart pounding, and called to it softly. The dog froze, looked at me, then turned back to its digging. It didn't want help. It wanted whatever was under that porch. Before I could stop it, the dog pushed its head under the porch, wagging its bony tail like it had found treasure. There was a sound, then a quick snap, like a branch breaking. The dog yelped once, sharp and terrified, and then it was gone. Just gone. No struggle, no fight. I stood there, staring, rain dripping down my face, my legs like stone. Something under that porch had taken it. I ran then. I ran all the way home, locked the door, closed the blinds. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that porch, that dog disappearing, the dark mouth of the crawl space swallowing it whole. I kept telling myself to forget about it, but the house didn't let me. The noises got louder. The growls became snarls, wet and eager. Once, I swear I heard my own name whispered in that awful rumble. The neighbors heard it too. Folks started moving out. The widow with the German shepherd packed up and left in the middle of the night. Houses went up for sale. Nobody bought. One night, after a string of sleepless weeks, I did the dumbest thing I've ever done. I took a flashlight and a crowbar, and I went back. I told myself I was going to see what was under that porch. I don't know what I thought. I'd find a coyote den, maybe. Some sick dog-eating lunatic hiding out. Anything I could explain. The yard was dead quiet when I stepped through the gate. Even the bugs were silent. The weeds scraped against my legs as I crossed the lawn. The house loomed up like a corpse, black windows watching me. I crouched at the edge of the porch, heart thudding so loud I thought whatever was under there would hear it. I shined my light into the crawl space. Dirt, old boards, scraps of something that might have been cloth or fur once. The smell hit me then, sweet rotten, like meat left out. In the sun, I swallowed hard and leaned closer. And then I saw a dot. It wasn't a den. It wasn't an animal. The dirt wasn't just dirt, it was moving, breathing almost. And under the boards, wedged between the beams, was a thing. I don't know how else to say it. It had teeth. So many teeth, packed tight and yellow, glistening with slime. And eyes. Too many of them, blinking out of sync, watching me. It wasn't shaped like anything that should have fit under there, but it did. Or maybe the house bent itself around it. The thing opened its mouth. It had to be a mouth, and I saw pieces of bone, scraps of collars, tufts of fur caught between its teeth. The growl it let out shook the porch, rattled my teeth in my head. I dropped the flashlight and ran faster than I ever have, not stopping until I was home, until I was behind my door with every lock bolted. I haven't gone near that house since. Nobody has. The yard keeps growing wilder, the house sinking lower like it's being swallowed by the ground. The noises haven't stopped. If anything, they're louder now. And sometimes, when the night's quiet and the moon's high, I swear, I see shapes moving in that yard, like the house is growing hungry again. So if you're ever in Corpus, and you find yourself on a street where the air feels heavy and the shadows seem too long, don't stop, don't look. And for the love of God, keep your dogs close. The old plantation house stood at the edge of a forgotten stretch of land outside Nacogdoches, shrouded in the kind of mossy oaks and creeping vines that seemed to grow only in places where bad things had happened. Locals called it the Braxton House, though no Braxtons had lived there in well over a century. Folks didn't like talking about it much. Hell, most pretended they didn't even know where it was. But everyone knew. And everyone had heard the stories. Stories about the chains that clattered in the dead of night, the doors that slammed so hard they shook the foundation, the shadows that lingered too long in the windows. 2 priests had tried to drive whatever evil lived there out, and both left broken men, their faith shattered, their minds frayed like old rope in the summer of 1987. I was 27, restless and cocky in a way only a man who hadn't lived enough could be. I'd inherited a bit of money from an uncle I'd never met, and with it came the deed to the Braxton house. I wasn't from around Nacogdoches. I was a city boy, Houston born and raised, but the idea of owning a piece of history, a real southern plantation, lit a fire in me. I figured the stories were just backwoods superstition, the kind of thing old-timers passed around to scare kids and keep drunks out of trouble. I loaded up my truck, packed a cooler of beer, and made the drive out, the kind of drive that feels longer than it is because the road gets narrower, the trees thicker, and the radio signal weaker with every mile. The house rose up out of the overgrowth like some forgotten tomb, its white paint long gone, the wood beneath blackened with age and rot. The porch sagged in the middle, and one of the shutters hung by a single rusted hinge, creaking in the breeze that smelled of stagnant water and decaying leaves. Still, I told myself it had good bones. A little work, a little sweat, and I'd have it shining again. That was the plan, anyway. I should have turned around right then. The air felt wrong, heavy and electric, like the sky before a tornado, only there wasn't a storm in sight. But pride's a hell of a drug, and I wasn't about to be scared off by a feeling. The first night, I set up a cot in what must have been the study. The floorboards groaned under my weight, and the smell inside was worse than outside mildew, old ash, and something sour I couldn't place. I cracked open a beer, propped open a window, and tried to ignore how the house seemed to be breathing around me, the walls settling with deep sighs and sharp cracks. Around midnight, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of chains dragging across the floor above me. Slow at first, like something testing its weight, then faster, as if whatever it was had grown impatient. I froze, my hand tightening around the bottle, my heart beating so loud I could hear it in my ears. I told myself it was a raccoon, maybe a possum. I told myself a lot of things, but when the chains stopped and the slamming began door after door upstairs, opening and crashing shut with such force I felt the vibrations in my chest. Knew no animal was making that kind of noise. I didn't sleep. I sat there in the dark, listening as the house raged around me, and when dawn finally broke, the house fell silent as if nothing had happened at all. I told myself I'd imagined it. Too much beer, nerves, the power of suggestion. But the next night was worse. The chains came again, louder this time, dragging down the staircase so slowly it felt like torture. I sat in the corner of the study with a crowbar in my hands, watching the dark mouth of the hallway, waiting for anything to come into view. The doors upstairs didn't just slam now. They opened so wide I could hear the knobs hit. The walls, then they slammed shut so hard I heard glass shatter somewhere. And in between the chaos, there was whispering. Low, guttural voices, too many to count, saying things I couldn't understand but that filled me with a dread so deep I wanted to claw my own ears out just to make it stop by the third day. I was a wreck. I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, and the house seemed to know it. The air inside was thick and hot, as if it were alive, watching me, waiting for me to break. I left the front door open that night, figuring if whatever haunted this place wanted me, it wouldn't matter anyway. The chains came again, faster, angrier, and I swear I saw them as time-heavy iron links moving down the stairs on their own, coiling like a serpent ready to strike. The doors upstairs didn't just slam, they tore off their hinges and crashed. To the floor, the sound deafening, and the whispering turned to screaming. The kind of screaming that makes your blood run cold, that makes you feel like your soul's being peeled away bit by bit. I fled at dawn, drove until I hit a diner on the outskirts of town, and sat there shaking, trying to convince myself to go back. But I couldn't. I hired a local contractor to board up the house. He laughed when I told him why, until he went out there himself. He didn't last an hour. Came back pale as death, his hands trembling so bad he couldn't even light his cigarette. He wouldn't say what he'd seen, but he wouldn't go back either. The house sat empty after that. The vines and moss swallowed it up again, as if the land itself was trying to hide it. Folks said the chains still rattle on stormy nights, that you can hear the doors slam if you get too close. Some say the spirits of the slaves who suffered there are crying out for justice. Others say something darker lives inside, something that feeds on fear and madness. I don't know what's true anymore, but I know I'll never go back. Some places just ain't meant for the living. The house on Booth Avenue didn't look like much from the street. Just another squat, two-story frame house like the others in that part of Fort Worth, white paint flaking off the siding, a sagging porch with a missing rail, windows clouded with grime. It had stood there for nearly 100 years, surviving storms, droughts, and the steady march of time, but the locals never spoke its address aloud. They called it the Bleeding Walls House, as if naming it gave the thing inside. More power, more hunger. Folks passing by quickened their steps, and kids on bikes would cross the street rather than ride too close. Even the mailman, a wiry old guy named Dale who'd seen plenty in his time, stuffed letters into the crooked mailbox without setting foot on the porch. It had been empty for years when John and Lisa moved in. They were city people from Austin, chasing a dream of a fresh start. John was a carpenter. Lisa taught high school English. The place was cheap, too cheap, but the realtor shrugged and said it was a fixer-upper. They figured they could handle it. Hell, they welcomed it. The house had charm, they said. The kind of place you could make into a home if you put in the work. From the moment they stepped inside, the air felt wrong, heavy, like breathing in dust and sadness. The floors creaked under their feet, not the usual kind of creak, but deep groans that sounded almost like a warning. Still, they ignored it. New beginnings, they told themselves. A little paint, a little elbow grease. They could make it beautiful. The first stain showed up in the dining room. It was small at first, a dark spot about the size of a quarter, just beneath the floral wallpaper. John figured it was rust from old nails or maybe some water damage. He scraped the wallpaper off, revealing plaster that oozed a reddish-brown streak, slow and thick like syrup. He wiped it clean, and for a while, it stayed gone. But the next morning, it was back. Bigger. They tried everything. John stripped the walls to the studs in that room. He replaced the plaster, painted it, sealed it. The stain came through anyway. Lisa could swear she smelled something faint and coppery at night, like old pennies or blood. She said nothing at first, chalking it up to nerves or imagination, but it got worse that soon. It wasn't just the dining room. The stains began appearing in the corners of the living room, in the seams of the stairwell, spreading like veins beneath the wallpaper, blooming through fresh paint. No matter how much John scraped, sealed, or repainted, the walls bled. Neighbors started avoiding them. The lady across the street, a widow named Mrs. Gutierrez, stopped waving when she saw them on the porch. One evening, as John was hauling trash to the curb, she hissed at him from her doorway, "You should leave. That house doesn't want you." John laughed it off, but the way she said it, so sure, so afraid it stayed with him. At night, they heard noises. At first, just soft tapping in the walls like mice. Then louder knocking, scratching, sometimes even what sounded like muffled voices arguing in another room. But when John checked, nothing. Just empty rooms and those damn stains, glistening. In the moonlight, Lisa stopped sleeping. She'd sit up in bed, staring at the walls, watching the stains spread, weeping down like tears. One night, she swore she saw a face in the pattern, a twisted, hollow-eyed face watching her from the corner near the closet. She shook John awake, but when he looked, there was nothing but the stain, dark and wet. John tried calling in experts. A structural engineer, a plumber, an environmental inspector. They all gave him the same answer. No leaks, no rusting pipes, no reason for the stains. One guy, a geologist from the university, even drilled into the walls and took samples. His report came back clean, no iron deposits, no contamination. Just plaster, wood, and paint. But the stains kept coming. Lisa started to change. Her skin grew pale and dark circles formed under her eyes. She spent hours scrubbing at the walls with bleach and scouring pads until her fingers bled. John found her in the dining room one morning, her nails cracked and raw, muttering to herself, "It won't stop, it won't stop, .. He tried to get her to leave, to stay with her sister in Dallas for a while, but she refused. "If we leave, it wins," she whispered. One night, during a storm, the house seemed to come alive. The wind screamed through the gaps in the siding, the walls groaned, and from every crack and seam, the stains poured forth, thicker than ever, running in rivulets down to the floor. The coppery smell filled the air, choking, suffocating. John could swear he heard the house breathing, deep and slow, and then the voices clear now, not muffled. Dozens of voices, whispering, crying, begging. Some angry, some terrified. He couldn't understand the words, but the tone chilled him to his core. In a panic, he grabbed Lisa, dragged her out into the rain. They stood on the lawn, soaked and shivering, staring at the house as the stain seeped out onto the porch, down the steps, as if the house itself was weeping blood. They never went back inside. The house stands empty again, the stain still visible on the walls, through the cracked windows like open wounds. The city tried to condemn it once, but every time they sent someone to inspect it, the person came back shaken, pale, unwilling to talk about what they saw. The scientists still call it rust or iron deposits or some trick of the materials. But the locals know better. They say the house remembers, that it bleeds for what happened there, long before John and Lisa ever set foot inside. Some say it was a murder or a suicide or something worse. No one really knows. No one really wants to. But if you ever find yourself on Booth Avenue and you see that house, don't look too long. Don't stop. Just keep walking. Because sometimes, if you listen hard enough, you can still hear it. The house breathing, the walls weeping, and the voices calling for anyone to come back inside. They still talk about the house out on the edge of Tyler, the one set back behind a line of old pecan trees where the branches twist like arthritic fingers. Locals will warn you if you ask about it. They'll tell you that no one lives there, that no one can live there, not for long. It's a 2-story farmhouse, once painted white, but now the wood is gray and splintering, and the roof sags like a tired old man's shoulders. The windows are black gaps, empty sockets staring out over the patchy yard where nothing grows except wild grass and thorny vines. Folks call it the house of the black-eyed bride. No one really knows when the story started. Some say it goes back to the early 1900s, when the place was first built by a man named Carson Hargrove for his bride-to-be. Others claim it's older, that the land itself is cursed. But what everybody agrees on is that if you go inside, if you hear the soft rustle of lace dragging over the warped wooden floors, if you catch the smell of wilting roses on the stale air, you best pray. Because she's looking for you. She's always looking. It was in the fall of '98 when my buddy Travis dared me to go in. We were seniors, dumb as hell, riding high on beer and the kind of reckless courage that comes from knowing you've got nothing real to fear. At least, that's what we thought. The house looked dead in the pale moonlight, all angles and shadows. The wind pushed through the pecan trees, making them creak like the bones of the long buried. I remember the way the night smelled, damp and earthy, like something rotting beneath the soil. Travis handed me the flashlight with a grin. "Come on, man, 5 minutes. Just go in, look around, come back out. I'll owe you a case of Shiner." I wanted to tell him no, but pride's a hell of a thing. I stepped onto the porch, the boards groaning under my weight, and pushed open the front door. It wasn't locked. It never is. The air inside was thick and stale, as if the house had been holding its breath for decades. The beam of my flashlight cut through the dark, catching dust motes that danced like tiny ghosts. The wallpaper peeled in long strips, exposing the cracked plaster beneath. I moved slow, each step louder than I wanted it to be. There was furniture still in there, though it looked like it hadn't been touched in years. A sofa with stuffing spilling out, a rocking chair that swayed just a little, though I told myself it was the breeze. And then I heard it, the soft, dragging whisper of fabric across the floorboards. I froze, heart pounding in my ears. The sound came again, closer this time. The smell of roses, old and dying, filled my nose, and the air grew cold enough that my breath came in white puffs. I turned toward the staircase. That's when I saw her. She stood at the top, bathed in moonlight streaming through a broken window, her gown tattered and yellowed with age. The veil hung in shreds from her head, and beneath it, her face was pale as bone. But it was her eyes. That made my blood run cold. They were empty pits, blacker than the night, as if someone had hollowed them out. She tilted her head, as if seeing me for the first time, or maybe recognizing me as someone she'd been waiting for. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. She started down the stairs, one slow step at a time, the wood creaking beneath her bare feet. The closer she got, the heavier the air felt, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. I stumbled back, dropping the flashlight. The beam spun wild, making the shadows dance along the walls. I could hear her breathing, now ragged, desperate, like she'd run a long way and finally found what she was looking for. The smell of roses was overpowering, sweet and sick at the same time. I don't remember getting to the door, only that suddenly I was outside. The night air cold and sharp in my lungs, Travis shouting my name from where he stood by the truck. I looked back just once and saw her watching me from the window, her veil fluttering in the breeze, those black eyes burning into me. I didn't say a word as Travis hauled me into the truck. I couldn't. We didn't talk about it for a long time, not really. But strange things started happening after that night. I'd see flashes of white in the corners of my eyes. I'd wake up to the smell of roses in my bedroom. The night before Travis died in a wreck on 69, he called me, drunk and crying, said he'd seen her standing at the foot of his bed, said she whispered his name. When I went to the funeral, I could have sworn I saw her through the trees, watching, waiting. I don't know what she wants. Maybe she really is waiting for a groom who'll never come. Maybe she just needs someone to see her, to acknowledge the ruin she's become. Or maybe she's damned, trapped in that house, doomed to search forever for something she'll never find. All I know is I don't go near that place anymore. No one does. The house of the black-eyed bride stands empty, but sometimes, when the wind's just right, you can hear the soft scrape of lace, the creak of the stairs, and the mournful sigh of a bride who should have been laid to rest a long, long time ago. They call it Hell Road, but it isn't marked that way on any map. Out by Midland, just past where the oil rigs thin out and the desert begins to swallow the horizon, there's a dirt path that cuts off from an old highway, and the locals swear it wasn't always there. Folks say it showed up sometime back in the 50s after a drilling accident that killed a dozen roughnecks. Some claim the ground cracked open that day and Hell Road was born out of it, like the earth itself spat up a warning. It's long, dry, and always looks like it's been abandoned for years, even when someone swears they just drove down it. The dust never settles there, always hanging in the air like smoke from an invisible fire. And at the end of that road sits the house. I first heard about it from a guy named Ray, a trucker who'd stopped for coffee at the diner where I worked nights. He had that look in his eyes, like he'd seen something he wasn't supposed to and hadn't slept right since. I remember him staring at his cup, hands trembling just enough to make the spoon clink against the ceramic. He told me he took a wrong turn, ended up at the dead end of Hell Road, saw the house, and heard things he didn't want to remember. He didn't go inside. Said he couldn't. Said the air around it felt thick, like breathing through wet cloth. Said the windows were dark, but he could feel eyes watching him, eyes that didn't blink. I laughed it off at the time. Just a tired man with a head full of highway ghosts. But that story stuck with me, crawled into my mind, and nested there. And the more I asked around, the more stories I heard, different voices, same house, same road, same sense of something wrong waiting at the end of it. It was late September when I finally decided to see it for myself. I don't know what got into me. Maybe I was tired of wondering. Maybe I was just stupid. The night I went, the sky was heavy with clouds, no moonlight to speak of. Just darkness and the weak glow of my truck's headlights cutting through the dust. The turnoff was easy to miss. If I hadn't been looking for it, I would have passed right by. Hell Road doesn't have a sign, just that ragged break in the scrub where the dirt path starts. I slowed down, eased the truck onto it, and felt the tires sink slightly into the soft, dry earth. The wind had a strange sound out there, like it was trying to speak but couldn't form the words. My gut told me to stop, turn around, go home. But I didn't listen. Driving that road felt like it stretched forever. The dust billowed behind me, swirling in the red glow of the taillights. I couldn't see far ahead, just the narrow beam of the headlights and the outline of sagebrush, and dry grass on either side. There were no other cars, no animals, not even a sound except for the crunch of tires and the whispering wind. The further I went, the more the air seemed to press in on me, like the night itself was getting heavier. And then I saw it, the house dotted. Looked old, like it had been there long before Hell Road ever existed. 2 stories, sagging roof, porch that leaned to one side like a drunk about to fall over. The windows were black, the kind of black that doesn't reflect a thing, like they'd been painted with tar. The yard, if you could call it that, was just dirt and dead weeds, and there was a fence around it made of crooked, splintered boards. The headlights caught something hanging on that fence bones, strung together with wire, rattling gently in the wind. Some were small, maybe animal bones, but some looked too big, too human. I killed the engine and sat there for a long time, hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. The house didn't move, didn't make a sound, but it felt alive. Not like a home, not like something that ever sheltered a family, but like a thing that waited, a thing that wanted. The longer I stared at it, the more I felt like I was being pulled toward it, like gravity had shifted and the house was the new center of the world. I tried to convince myself to leave, but my hand moved to the door handle anyway. I stepped out, boots crunching on the dry ground, the air colder than it had any right to be. The smell hit me then like rot, like something dead and buried shallow, like earth turned sour. I didn't mean to walk toward it. My feet just did, one step at a time, slow and careful, like approaching a sleeping predator. The bones on the fence clattered softly as I passed them. The house loomed over me, and I swear, up close, the boards seemed to pulse like they were breathing. The front door was cracked open, just enough to show that blackness inside. I could feel that darkness, looking back at me. And then I heard it faint, but clear, a voice, a woman's voice, soft and sad, calling from inside. Help me. Just 2 words, but they froze me in place. I didn't want to go in. Every part of me screamed not to. But I stepped onto the porch, the wood groaning under my weight. The door swung wider like it was inviting me, like it was glad I'd come. Inside, it was colder still. The smell was worse, thick enough to taste. The walls were warped, the wallpaper peeling in long, curling strips. The floorboards felt soft, like they'd give way any second. The voice came again, from somewhere deeper in the house. Help me. And this time, there was a wet sound beneath the words, like something dragging itself across the floor. I should have run. I should have turned and run until my lungs burst. But I kept moving, down a narrow hall, past doorways that opened onto rooms filled with shadows that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking right at them. The house creaked inside, like it knew I was there, like it was waking up. I found the source of the voice in a room at the end of the hall. The door was shut, but the voice came from behind it, closer now, desperate. Help me. Please." I reached for the knob, and my hand shook so bad I barely managed to turn it. The door swung open on its own, slow and smooth, and the room beyond was empty. Just bare walls, bare floor, and that darkness pooling in the corners. But the voice, it was right there in my ear now, whispering, crying, begging. And then I felt it cold fingers brushing the back of my neck, light as cobwebs. I spun around, but nothing was there. The door slammed shut behind me, and the darkness swallowed the room whole. I don't remember much after that. Just flashes. A face in the dark, pale and hollow-eyed, mouth stretched too wide. Hands, too many hands, reaching out of the walls, the floor, the ceiling, clutching, pulling. The voice, no longer sad but angry, screaming at me, calling me by name. The house knew me. It always had. I woke up on the road, covered in dust. My truck idling a few feet away, the sun just starting to rise. My clothes were torn, my skin scratched raw, but I was alive. I don't know how I got out. I don't want to know. I drove home, left Midland behind, and I don't talk about that night. Not to anyone. Not until now. Because I saw something in the rear view as I drove away. The house at the end of Hell Road, small in the distance. And on the porch, a figure stood watching me go, its face hidden by the shadows. But its eyes, God help me, its eyes shone like mirrors, and they were still watching long after the house was gone from sight. The house at the corner of Belmont and 8th had been empty for as long as most folks in Odessa could remember. It sat behind a leaning iron fence, half swallowed by a mess of mesquite and weeds, its paint flaking off like sunburned skin. Nobody mowed the lawn or swept the porch. The windows, though still intact, were clouded over with grime, giving the place a blind, sullen look. There were always rumors, of course stories traded over beers at the Dusty Spur or whispered by kids daring each other to go up to the porch and knock. But no one really wanted to get close, not since what happened back in 1976. Folks said you could still hear it some nights, the crack of the shotgun, the woman's scream cut short. And if you were close enough, you might see the shadows in the upstairs window, playing out the same scene over and over. That's what they said anyway. But the most unsettling thing about that house, if you ask the old-timers, wasn't the blood stain on the bedroom floorboards that wouldn't scrub, clean, or the smell of old smoke that clung to the walls no matter how hard you aired the place out. It was the clocks. Every single one of them, from the grandfather clock in the parlor to the cheap plastic kitchen clock to the little brass alarm clock by the bed, they all stopped at the same time. 3:33 every night without fail. New batteries. Didn't help. Winding them didn't help. It didn't matter if you brought in a clock from outside. By the second or third night, it would stop at 3:33. Just like the rest dot when Mark Lawson bought the house, folks figured he didn't know what he was getting himself into. He was a young guy, mid-30s maybe, moved to Odessa from Houston after a nasty divorce. He didn't say much at first, just kept to himself. Drove a beat-up Dodge truck, worked odd jobs. People watched him haul boxes into the house, paint over the graffiti on the garage door, and clear out the worst of the brush. For a while it looked like maybe, just maybe, someone was finally going to make a go of it. The first few nights were quiet, as far as anyone could tell. The porch light came on at dusk, went off at dawn. Mark would sit out there sometimes, smoking, staring out at the street like he was waiting for something. But after about 4 days, the change started. His lights would flicker, sometimes going out altogether for minutes at a time. He stopped coming outside so much. When folks saw him, he looked tired, hollow-eyed, like he hadn't slept. And the strangest thing was, when he went into town for groceries, he always bought batteries. Packs and packs of them like he was stockpiling for a storm. The sheriff said later that Mark came to see him around the 5th day. Said he was polite but rattled, like he wasn't sure if he was crazy or if something real was happening. He told the sheriff about the clocks, how no matter what he did, they'd stop at 3:33. How he'd lie in bed waiting for it, heart pounding, and sure enough, the clocks would quit ticking and the house would go still, so still it hurt his ears. He said he'd hear footsteps upstairs after that. Slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth across the bedroom floor. And sometimes he'd catch the smell of gunpowder, sharp and sour, like a firecracker had gone off in the next room. The sheriff nodded, listened, and told Mark to get some rest. Maybe see a doctor. That's what you say to a man who looks like he's teetering on the edge. But Mark wasn't satisfied with that. He went home, locked the doors, and that was the last anyone saw of him in town. On the 7th night, something happened. People on the block heard it, this loud crash around 3:30 in the morning. Some said it was like a door slamming. Others thought it sounded more like furniture being thrown across the room. A few brave souls peeked out their windows but saw nothing but the dark shape of the house against the night. When morning came, the mailman noticed the front door was standing open. No sign of Mark. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The sheriff went out there around noon after a couple of neighbors called. He stepped inside and the first thing he noticed was the cold. It was July, hot as hell outside, but the inside of that house felt like a meat locker. The air smelled stale, with that undercurrent of burnt powder and something else, something coppery and old. He called out for Mark but got no answer. The place looked normal at first glance. The furniture was in place, no sign of a struggle. But when he went upstairs, that's when things got strange. The bedroom door was ajar. Inside, Mark's mattress was propped up against the window, like he tried to block out whatever was outside. The alarm clock on the nightstand read 3:33, its second hand frozen in place. The sheriff checked the other clocks. Same thing, every one of them stopped at 3:33. They searched for Mark, but he was gone. No sign of him in the house or around the property. His truck was still in the driveway, keys in the ignition. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. Over the years, a few more people tried living in that house. A retired couple from Abilene, a family that didn't last more than 2 nights, even a drifter who tried squatting there for a while. The story was always the same. Clock stopped at 3:33. Strange noises, cold spots, smell of smoke, and always that oppressive sense of being watched of something waiting just out of sight. Nobody stayed longer than a week. Eventually, folks stopped trying. The house just sat there, decaying a little more each year while the clocks inside kept their terrible vigil. Even now, if you stand on the sidewalk at night and look up at the dark windows, you might catch a glint of light like the face of a clock reflecting the moon. And if you listen real close, you might hear the faint tick-dot-dot, 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 as time runs out all over again. The bungalow on the edge of Wichita Falls wasn't much to look at. A single-story clapboard house with paint the color of dishwater, windows clouded by years of dust, and a yard overtaken by yellow grass and weeds. From the outside, it blended into the neighborhood's forgotten corners, the kind of place people drove past without a second glance. But once you stepped inside, you knew right away something was wrong. The air was heavier, like it had weight to it, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The place had been empty for years, ever since the last family packed up in the middle of the night and left without a word. Folks around town whispered about what went on there. No one stayed long enough to find out for sure. Some said it was built over a Comanche burial ground. Others claimed a man killed his whole family inside and the walls soaked up the blood. But the truth was murkier. Scarier because it had no clear beginning, no face to put to the terror. It was just ... there. Even. On the hottest Texas nights, when the rest of Wichita Falls sweltered in still, sticky air, the bungalow stayed cold. A deep, bone-aching cold that felt like the house was pressing its fingers into your flesh. Ghost hunters came in waves over the years, drawn by the legends. Big men with cameras and thermal readers, cocky kids with YouTube dreams, even so-called. Psychics with crystals and chants. They all walked in with grins and left pale and shaking if they made it to sunrise. Most didn't. Midnight was the breaking point. That's when the house came alive. It would start small. A creak in the floorboards. That wasn't from your own step. A faint whistle, like wind where there shouldn't be any. Then the air would thicken, the kind of pressure that made your ears pop and your vision swim at the edges. And then the noise. God, the noise. Dishes would start to rattle in the kitchen. You'd hear them crash to the floor, shards of porcelain, flying like shrapnel, though when morning came the cabinets would be full again as if nothing ever broke. Doors would slam so hard the walls shuddered. Pictures, if anyone dared hang one, would leap from the nails. There were voices too. Low at first, like whispers between people in the next room. Then louder, overlapping, men, women, children, all arguing in a language no one recognized. But the worst was the scream. It came at midnight, without fail. A single howl that tore through the house, filled every room, echoed inside your skull. It sounded human, but not quite. Too stretched, too raw, like a soul being flayed alive. Folks said if you stayed after that scream, the house marked you. Things would follow you home. Shadows where there shouldn't be any, footsteps behind you when you were alone. Bad dreams so real you'd wake up with bruises, scratches, bloody. Noses. One man tried to live there after buying it cheap at auction. A Vietnam vet named Curtis Daniels, tough as nails, thought the stories were just small-town gossip. He lasted 2 nights. The first, he drank himself to sleep to drown out the sounds. The second, they found him wandering barefoot down the highway. At dawn, muttering about the walls bleeding, about hands reaching for him from the cracks. He never went back. What made it worse was how the house seemed to feed on certain people more than others. There was a pattern if you looked close enough. The desperate, the broken, the guilty. It was like it knew. Like it could smell the rot inside a person and dug its claws in deep. And once it had a piece of you, it didn't let go. People said they saw shapes in the windows at night. Faces looking out, faces that weren't there when you checked again. The lights, though no one lived there, flickered on sometimes, a soft yellow glow that made you think, just for a second, maybe someone was inside. But no one was. At least, no one alive. One summer, a team from Dallas came out. Professional ghost chasers with all the gear money could buy. They set up cameras, recorders, EMF detectors, the works. They planned to document everything, prove once and for all what was happening. They lasted till 2 a.m. The footage they recovered showed things no one could explain. Chairs sliding across floors on their own, shadows moving against the direction of the light, objects lifting off shelves and flying at the camera. And that scream. When it started, the lens cracked. The camera went dead. They left town before breakfast, wouldn't answer calls after that. The tape? No one knows what happened to it. Some say they destroyed it. Others say they kept it locked up too. Scared to look at it again, the city tried to tear the place down once. Sent a crew out with bulldozers and wrecking equipment. But as soon as the machines touched the outer wall, the ground shook, and one of the operators swore he saw a figure, a woman in white face hidden behind a veil standing on the porch. The equipment stalled. Wouldn't start again. They gave up before nightfall. No one's tried since. Every so often, someone new gets the idea to explore it. Teenagers mostly, trying to prove they're braver than their friends. They go in with flashlights, cell phones, nervous laughter. And they come out running, pale, shaking, sometimes with scratches on their arms they can't explain. And always before midnight, because that's when the house truly shows its teeth. That's when the air turns ice cold, the howls rise from the walls, and the things that dwell there remind you that some houses don't want to be empty. Some houses remember, and some houses hate that, so the bungalow sits there still, windows dark, door sagging on its hinges, waiting for the next fool who thinks they can outlast it. But they won't. No one does. Because the house doesn't just haunt the living. It eats them, piece by piece, and it's always hungry. The house on the corner of Taylor and 6th had stood longer than most folks in Brownsville could remember, even the old-timers with their sun-beaten faces and voices like rusted hinges. It was a two-story relic of the 1890s, leaning slightly, as if tired of fighting time and gravity. The paint, once white, had long since peeled away, leaving weathered boards the color of old bones. The front porch sagged like a frown, and the windows stared out empty and dark, as though the house itself was watching, waiting. In a town where summer heat clung to your skin like wet gauze and the nights felt like warm baths, there was one thing about that house that everyone knew but few dared to talk about. It was cold, deathly cold. Even when the July sun baked the streets and made the air shimmer like hot oil, that house radiated a chill that could cut through you like a blade of ice. Folks said it was the cold of the grave. And maybe they weren't. Far off, I first heard the stories from my grandfather, who'd lived his whole life in Brownsville and swore up and down that the house had always been that way. He'd tell me about the time a boy named Elias dared to break in on a dare one night back in 1952. They found him the next morning on the porch, curled up tight like a dead spider, his lips blue, teeth shattered from chattering so hard. He wouldn't speak a word ever again, just rocked back and forth, his eyes wide and empty. My grandfather would pause there, light a cigarette with shaking hands, and stare off at nothing like he could still see that boy. I tried to laugh it off. Ghost stories, that's all they were. But I always felt that unease whenever I passed the house, even as a grown man. You know the kind the hair on your arm stands up, the air feels heavy, and the world just seems wrong in some small but important way. It wasn't until last summer that I stopped being a listener of the stories and became part of one. It was late June, hotter than hell itself. The kind of heat where the pavement melts the solace of your shoes and the air smells like burning rubber and dust. My wife and I had been fighting again, and I needed to clear my head. I walked, aimless and angry, the sweat dripping from my brow into my eyes, stinging like salt. Without thinking, I found myself standing in front of the old house. The place looked worse than ever, its roof sagging in the middle, the yard nothing but cracked dirt and weeds tall enough to hide a man. The front door, which had always been boarded up tight, now hung crookedly on its hinges, as if inviting me in, and like a fool, I went. The moment I crossed the threshold, the air hit me like a slap, freezing. My breath came out in little white clouds. I rubbed my arms, shivering, trying to make sense of it. Outside, it was close to 110. Inside, it felt like winter in Michigan. The floor creaked under my boots, the sound echoing through the house like a gunshot. I could see my breath in front of my face, and every step I took seemed to sink me deeper into that unnatural cold. The house smelled of rot and damp earth. The wallpaper hung in strips, and the wood beneath my feet felt soft in places, like walking on a sponge. But the worst part was the silence. No groan of wood settling, no drip of water from a leaky pipe, no rats or bugs. Just silence and cold. Don't know what made me go deeper. Stubbornness, maybe. Or maybe the house wanted me too. The hallway stretched out long and dark, ending at a staircase that rose into shadows. I could feel the cold seeping into my bones, numbing my fingers and making my teeth ache. I should have left. God knows I should have. But I kept going, halfway. Up the stairs I heard it. A sound so soft I almost thought I imagined it. A whisper, low and wet, like words spoken through a mouthful of mud. I froze, my heart thudding in my chest so hard it hurt. The whisper came again. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was pleading, begging. I forced myself to the top of the stairs, my legs heavy and stiff with cold. The hallway up there was darker, the air colder still. I could feel frost forming on my eyelashes. I stumbled toward the sound, down the hall to a door at the end. My breath came in ragged gasps, my lungs burning from the cold. I pushed the door open. The room beyond was empty, except for a single wooden chair in the center, and sitting in that chair was a figure, barely more than a shadow. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its gaze, heavy and hateful. The whispering filled the room now, louder, words tumbling over each other, desperate and broken. The cold was unbearable, like knives digging into my skin. I wanted to run. I tried to. But my body wouldn't obey. My feet felt rooted to the floor, my limbs sluggish and weak. The figure rose from the chair, and as it did, the whispering stopped. The silence rushed back in, thicker than before. It stepped toward me, slow and deliberate. With each step it took, the temperature dropped even further. I could feel ice forming on my clothes, my skin cracking from the cold. My vision blurred, and I could hear my own heart slowing, the beats few and far between. And then it spoke, clear and terrible, just 2 words, join me. Something in those words broke whatever spell held me frozen. I turned and fled, crashing down the stairs, slipping and sliding on the frost that now coated the steps. I burst through the front door, gasping, the heat of the Texas night hitting me like a furnace blast. I kept running, not daring to look back, not until the house was out of sight. I woke the next morning in my own bed, my wife hovering over me, worry on her face. My skin was pale, my lips blue, my body trembling with cold that no amount of blankets or hot coffee could chase away. The doctor said it was hypothermia. In the middle of summer, I don't go near that house anymore. I don't even walk that part of town. But sometimes, late at night, when the air is still and the world is quiet, I swear I can feel that cold again, creeping in under the door, seeping through the walls, and I hear the whisper, soft, pleading, calling me back. There are places in Texas where the trees grow so thick and the air hums so quiet that the world feels forgotten. The Piney Woods is one of those places. Folks drive past on the highway, see the green walls of pine and oak blur by, and they don't think twice. But deep inside, where no road reaches, there are spots that don't belong to any living soul. And one of them is that house the house no map shows, the house no deed claims, the house that's been waiting longer than any of us have been alive. It starts the way these things always do. Someone gets curious. In this case, it was a surveyor named Carl Duggan. He was working a contract for a developer out of Dallas who wanted to carve up a patch of woods for cabins. Carl was good at his job, straight shooter, family man, not the type to spook easy. He told his wife he'd be home in 2 days. He wasn't lying when he said it. Carl parked his truck at the edge of the tract and set off with his gear GPS unit, topo maps, rangefinder, all the tools that make a modern man think he's got nature licked. The sun was high and hot, and the air smelled of sap and damp leaves. As he walked, the land sloped gentle at first, then steeper, until the trees packed so close together they choked out the light. Hours passed. His GPS glitched, blinking like it was confused about where it was. The signal dropped. His map didn't match what he saw. He should have been at a creek marked in blue, but all he saw was dry leaves and moss. That's when he spotted it, a corner of roof poking through the trees, black shingles rotted to nothing. Carl wasn't the first to see that roof. Folks don't talk about the house much, but every so often someone stumbles on it. Hunters, hikers, surveyors like Carl, and if they're smart, they turn around right then. But something about that place pulls at a man. Carl pushed through the undergrowth. The house was old, older than it had a right to be. The walls were gray, warped boards half fallen in. The porch sagged like a mouth missing teeth. Windows dark as pits. He felt it before he stepped onto the porch, a pressure in the air, like the world holding its breath. His boots hit the boards and the sound echoed too loud. He told himself he was just checking it out for safety's sake. Could be squatters, could be dangerous animals inside. That's what he told himself. But in his gut he knew better. The front door stood open a crack. He pushed it wider, hinges shrieking. Inside, the air was cold. Not just cool cold, like the house kept the chill of some deep place no sun touched. The floorboards groaned under his weight. Dust thick as frost coated everything, but there were footprints leading in, none leading out. He called out, voice shaking a little. No answer. The smell hit him, then wet rot and something worse, like old blood, like meat gone bad. He should have left. He knows that now. But he kept on. The rooms were empty of furniture, empty of life, but full of that feeling like he was being watched. The walls leaned in as if the house were listening. Shadows clung to the corners no matter how the light from the door reached for them. In the back room, he found the stairs leading down. The door to the basement hung open. A smell rolled up from below, earthy, but not just dirt. Something foul. He stood there, hand on the frame, heart hammering. He told himself again to leave. But his feet moved forward. The steps creaked as he went down. The basement was larger than it should have been, the walls of packed earth and stone. A single bulb dangled from a wire, unlit. But he could see shapes in the dark old crates, broken tools, a table in the center. On the table lay a book. It looked ancient, leather warped and blackened, pages curled. Carl reached for it, though his fingers trembled. The moment he touched it, the air grew colder still, and the dark seemed to press closer. Voices whispered, low and fast, words he couldn't make out. He yanked his hand back, but the book stayed warm where he'd touched it, pulsing like a living thing. And then the whispering stopped and the dark felt thicker. He backed up, foot catching on a root or bone he didn't look to see. He ran up the stairs, out the door, into the woods. The house behind him seemed to breathe, the walls pulsing like lungs. Carl didn't stop running until he hit a trail. His truck was gone. The forest was wrong paths twisted, trees unfamiliar. Night fell fast, too fast, and the stars above looked strange. He stumbled on, calling for help, but the woods swallowed his voice. Days passed, or maybe hours, it was hard to tell. He found the house again, no matter which way he turned. Always the house, waiting, watching. When they found him, if you can call it that, it was weeks later. A hunter stumbled on a clearing that wasn't there before. Carl lay on the ground, eyes wide and empty, mouth frozen in a scream. His body was thin as a corpse left to the elements, though he'd only been missing a short while. They buried him, but the woods kept the secret. The house? It's still out there. No map shows it, no deed claims it, but it waits. And if you hear it calling, you'd best turn back. Because it doesn't call out of kindness. It calls because it's hungry.